The briefcase made a soft click when I set it on the conference room table, and my son-in-law didn't even look up from his phone. That told me everything I needed to know about how the next hour was going to go, and everything I needed to remind myself about why I had spent the last 4 months preparing for it. The room smelled like fresh paint and stale ambition. Kevin had renovated the office building 6 months ago, the one I had handed him the keys to with my own 2 hands on the day my daughter married him. The one my late husband Harold had built from a single hardware store on the corner of Millbrook and 5th into a regional supply chain that employed 43 people. Kevin had painted over the dark wood panels Harold had been so proud of. He'd replaced the carpet with cold gray tile. He'd taken down the framed photograph of Harold and me cutting the ribbon at the grand opening and put up a motivational poster that said, "Move fast, don't look back." I had looked at that poster every time I visited and said nothing. I had smiled and brought coffee cake to the staff meetings and sat in the chair they offered me. The smaller one, always placed slightly apart from the main table, like a guest in my own company, and I had said nothing. That was over now. My daughter came in 3 minutes after Kevin, which told me they had arrived together and he had told her to wait in the hall while he got settled first. Claire was 51 years old, and she had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubbornness, though lately Kevin seemed to have found a way to redirect that stubbornness entirely toward me. She sat down beside him and folded her hands on the table the way she used to in church when she was small, and she looked at the center of the table instead of at me. There was a third chair across from them. I didn't sit in it right away. I stood at the end of the table with my hand on the briefcase, and I took a moment to look at the window, at the parking lot below, at the spot where Harold used to park his old blue truck every single morning for 32 years without exception. "Mom?" Claire said. Her voice had the careful tone of someone who had rehearsed. "We should get started." I sat down. Kevin put his phone away and opened a folder. He was a tall man with very good posture and the particular kind of confidence that comes not from experience, but from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. He had married Claire 11 years ago at a ceremony in Savannah. I had paid for the rehearsal dinner. I had paid for the honeymoon. I had paid for the down payment on their first house. And when Kevin decided 2 years later that he wanted to leave his finance job and join the family business, I had paid for that too. Paid for it with time, with training, with trust, and eventually with a title on the letterhead that read Chief Executive Officer, while mine was quietly changed to Founder Emeritus, which is a very elegant way of saying that you are no longer needed. I had watched it happen so gradually that I sometimes wondered if I had imagined it, the little things first. Kevin suggesting I didn't need to attend certain meetings because I would find them tedious. Kevin CC'ing me on fewer emails and then none at all. Kevin speaking about the company in the first person, my team, my vision, my direction, at an industry dinner while I sat at the same table, and the man next to me leaned over and asked quietly if I was related to the owner. Then the larger things. The refinancing I hadn't been consulted on. The supplier contracts renegotiated without my signature. The afternoon, Claire came to my house and sat across from me at the kitchen table with that same folded hands posture and told me that Kevin felt, and she agreed, that it might be less confusing for staff if I stopped coming by the office unannounced. I had made lunch that day. Chicken salad on sourdough, the same thing I had made for Claire every school day from kindergarten to 12th grade. I put her plate in front of her and I sat down and I listened to her read from a script she had clearly gone over with Kevin more than once. And I thought about Harold. I thought about what he had said to me in the hospital near the end, when it was just the two of us and the room was very quiet. "The business is yours," he had said. "I built it for us, but it was always yours. Don't let anyone make you forget that." I had not forgotten. I had only taken my time. The folder Kevin opened contained a document that was 11 pages long. He slid it across the table to me with one finger, the same gesture a person makes when they're returning something they never wanted in the first place. "We've had this drawn up," he said. It transfers full ownership of the remaining assets, the building, the inventory holdings, and the brand, into my name. Claire's name is on it as co-owner. He paused. Obviously, I said. He looked at me briefly and then back at the document. In exchange, you'd receive a monthly payment, $1,500. It would come directly to your account on the first of every month. He said it the way you describe a reasonable arrangement. Practical, clean, done. I looked at Claire. She was looking at the table, $1,500 a month. Harold and I had started with nothing, a rented storefront, a secondhand cash register, and a loan from Harold's mother that had taken us 4 years to repay. We had worked 7 days a week for the first decade. I had done the books every night at the kitchen table after Claire was in bed, squinting under a lamp at columns of numbers until I understood every single one. We had built the business through 2 recessions and 1 flood, and the year Harold's back surgery put him out of commission for 4 months, and I ran everything alone while also caring for him and raising a teenager. The company had been valued 18 months ago by an outside firm before Kevin found a reason to dispute the methodology at just under $4 million. $1,500 a month. And if I don't sign? I said. Kevin leaned back in his chair. The company has debt, he said. Operational debt that accumulated during the expansion. If ownership remains in dispute, the bank could move to call in the line of credit. That would be very bad for the employees, for the community. He let that land. He was good at letting things land. We don't want that. None of us want that. I nodded slowly. I looked at the document on the table. I did not touch it. Claire, I said. Do you remember the summer you were 8 years old and you broke the garage window with your bicycle? She looked up. She hadn't expected that. You were so afraid to tell your father, I said. You came to me instead. You cried for an hour in the kitchen. Do you remember what I told you? She was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, you said the window could be fixed. I said the window could be fixed. I said the window could be fixed. I feeded. And I said that the truth is always easier than the alternative, even when it doesn't feel that way. I looked at her for a long moment. I still believe that. Something moved across her face. I wasn't sure what it was. She looked back down at the table. Kevin cleared his throat. Margaret. He only used my name when he wanted to signal that we were moving past sentiment into the part of the conversation that he controlled. I understand this is emotional. But this is a business decision. The company needs clear leadership. You haven't been active in operations for 3 years. This is the right move. For whom? I said. For everyone. I put my hand on the briefcase. May I show you something? He gestured as if to say, go ahead. The indulgent gesture of someone who has already won and is willing to be gracious about it. I opened the briefcase. The first thing I removed was a letter on the letterhead of Hargrove and Associates, an estate and business law firm out of Charleston. It was dated 14 weeks prior. I set it on the table and turned it so that Kevin could read it. He leaned forward. I watched his face. The letter confirmed that I had, 14 weeks ago, engaged the firm to conduct a full audit of the ownership structure of Foster Family Supply, Inc., and to advise me on my legal rights as founder and majority shareholder of record. It noted that despite my title having been changed to founder emeritus in an internal HR document, no legal transfer of majority ownership had ever been executed. The shares Harold had left to me in his will, comprising 68% of the company, remained in my name in the corporate registry of the state of South Carolina. Kevin knew this. He had known it all along. The whole arrangement, the title change, the gradual exclusion, the document sitting on the table right now, had been built on the assumption that I didn't know it, or that if I did know it, I was too tired or too sad or too afraid of conflict to do anything about it. He set the letter down. His posture was the same. His expression was almost the same. But something had shifted in the room and all 3 of us could feel it. That's one firm's interpretation, he said. It is, I agreed. I took the second document from the briefcase. This is another firm's interpretation. The second letter was from a different firm, one in Colombia, confirming the same findings. I had been advised to get a second opinion. I had been very thorough. I had had a lot of quiet evenings to be thorough. After Harold died, people kept telling me I would find my rhythm. That grief had its own calendar, and eventually the days would start to feel more like themselves again. They were right, and it took longer than anyone said it would. And the rhythm I found was not the one I expected. It was quieter, more deliberate. I stopped filling the silence with activity and started paying attention to what the silence was telling me. I started reading things carefully that I had previously signed without reading. I started asking questions I had previously been too polite to ask. I started writing things down. I had spent 39 years building something. I was 67 years old. I had buried my husband and watched my daughter drift toward a man who saw family as a resource to be managed. And I had decided, somewhere in those quiet evenings, that I was not finished. "There's more," I said. The third document was a trust agreement executed 6 weeks ago. I had transferred my 68% ownership stake into a revocable living trust, of which I was the sole trustee and sole beneficiary during my lifetime. The trust had been structured with the help of a woman named Patricia Dunmore, who had been my accountant for 22 years and who, when I had called her and explained what I suspected was happening, had said, "I was wondering when you were going to call," and had driven 3 hours to sit at my kitchen table and help me understand every single number. The trust meant that the document Kevin had prepared was not executable. You cannot transfer what belongs to a trust without the trustee's consent. I was the trustee. I had not consented. Kevin picked up the trust agreement. He read it for a long time. He read it again. Then he set it down very carefully. The way people set things down when they are trying not to show that their hands have gone slightly unsteady. "This doesn't change the operational reality," he said. His voice was still level. "I run the company. The staff reports to me. The bank relationships are mine. The mortgage on this building is in the company's name," I said, "which means it belongs to the majority shareholder, which is still me." I paused. "The bank knows this. I spoke with Jim Calloway at First Regional 3 weeks ago. He was very helpful. Jim Calloway had been Harold's banker for 20 years. He had come to the funeral. He had shaken my hand and told me to call if I ever needed anything. I had called. He had been, as I said, very helpful." Claire made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I looked at her. She was not looking at the table anymore. She was looking at me, and her expression had changed into something I recognized but hadn't seen on her face in a long time. When she was young and something frightened her, not the ordinary fears of childhood, but the bigger ones, the ones that came at night and made no sound. She would come to my room and stand in the doorway and look at me with exactly that expression, not asking for anything, just making sure I was still there. I wanted to reach across the table and take her hand. I didn't because this was not that kind of moment yet, but I wanted to. "Claire," I said gently, "I want to be very clear that none of this is about punishing you." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes had gone bright. "Your father built this company so that our family would be taken care of. All of our family. That has not changed." I kept my voice even. "What has changed is my willingness to allow it to be taken from us. From both of us." Kevin put his hand flat on the table. "Margaret, I think you need to understand what you're doing here. I have a management team in place. I have client relationships. You have a title I gave you," I said. It was the first time I had ever said that directly to him, and I felt the truth of it move through me like something being set right after a long time of being tilted. "I gave it to you because my daughter loves you, and I wanted to believe that meant something. I still want to believe that." I looked at him steadily. "But I am not going to sign a document that hands you $4 million worth of what Harold and I built in exchange for $1,500 a month and your assurance that you'll be reasonable about it." He started to say something, I held up one hand. I'm not finished. He stopped. I have a proposal, I said. I took the fourth document from the briefcase. This one was mine. Patricia and I had written it together, and a third attorney, a business transaction specialist Patricia had referred me to, had reviewed it and suggested 2 modifications, both of which we had incorporated. I am willing to formalize a management transition. Kevin, you would retain the CEO title and operational authority. A board would be established, 3 members, including myself, 1 independent director, and 1 of your choosing. Major financial decisions require board approval. Claire receives a formal equity stake of 20%, transferred from my trust as a gift, irrevocable. Compensation for both of you is set at market rate, reviewed annually. I slid the document across the table. The company stays in the family, I said, which is what Harold wanted, which is what I want. But it does not disappear into an arrangement designed to cut me out of something I spent my life building. Not for $1,500 a month, not for any amount. The room was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, a truck pulled into the parking lot, not an old blue one, just an ordinary delivery truck. And I watched it for a moment and thought about Harold, about the particular way he used to whistle when he was figuring something out, walking the length of the original store and whistling quietly to himself until the answer came. He had been a patient man, patient and stubborn in equal measure, which he always said was the only combination that ever got anything built. I thought he would have found this whole situation grimly funny. I thought he might have whistled about it. Kevin was reading the proposal. His jaw was tight. He read it the way a man reads something he doesn't want to admit is reasonable. Claire was reading it too, leaning slightly toward him, and as she read, her shoulders dropped maybe 1/4 of an inch, the smallest possible release of tension, but I noticed it because I had been watching her shoulders since she was born. This is not what we discussed, Kevin said finally. He meant him and Claire. He meant the conversation they'd had before this meeting, the strategy they had worked out together. He was saying it out loud in front of me, which meant he had forgotten, briefly, that I was a person who listened carefully. Claire looked up from the proposal. She looked at him. Then she looked at me. Mom, she said. Just that. Just the word, the way she used to say it standing in the doorway in the dark. I'm right here, I said. She looked back down at the document. I watched her read the part about the equity stake, the 20% irrevocable, a gift, her gift, something that would be hers no matter what happened with the marriage, no matter what happened with Kevin, no matter what anyone decided to do or undo in the years ahead. Something Harold would have wanted her to have. I'd asked Patricia if that was too much to give away. Patricia had looked at me over her reading glasses and said, Margaret, you're not giving it away. You're putting it where it belongs. She was right. She usually was. Kevin set the document down. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. An acknowledgement that the territory had shifted and that the map he had brought to this meeting was no longer accurate. I'll need to have our attorney review this, he said. Of course, I said. Take all the time you need? He gathered the papers and stood up. He looked like he wanted to say something else and decided against it. He picked up his phone and walked to the door, and he stopped there for a moment without turning around. And then he left. Claire and I were alone in the conference room. She didn't speak right away. I didn't either. The room felt different without Kevin in it. Larger, or maybe just quieter. The particular quiet of 2 people who have loved each other for a long time and have been, for a while, talking around a thing they should have said directly. I didn't know it had gotten this far, she said at last. I know. The thing with the title, with keeping you out of the meetings. She shook her head slowly. He said you wanted that. He said you told him you were tired and you wanted to step back. I never said that. I know, she said. I mean, I think I knew. She stopped. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. He makes it very easy to believe the version that's most convenient. He does, I agreed. I kept my voice even. There was no point in adding to her pain on that subject. She already knew. Some part of her had known for a while. And that knowledge was its own private grief that she would have to work through in her own time, in whatever way she decided to work through it. That was not mine to solve or to judge. What was mine was the company, my daughter's security, the thing Harold had built and that I had continued building and that I had decided, in those quiet evenings with my legal pads and my phone calls to Patricia, was not going to be dissolved by a man who thought that patience and age were the same thing as weakness. Your father used to say, I began, and then I stopped because I didn't want to cry in this room. I wanted to cry at home, in the kitchen where I had cried every other time I needed to. Not here. What did he say? Claire asked. Her voice was soft. I looked at the window again. At the parking lot. He said that the worst mistake you can make in business is to confuse the person who holds the title with the person who built the thing. She was quiet. He was talking about suppliers, originally, about a vendor who had sold the company twice, and both times the new owner thought the brand value would transfer automatically. I almost smiled. It never does. No, Claire said. He built it for you, I said. And for me. And I intend to make sure it stays that way. She looked at me then, really looked at me. And for a moment she was every age she had ever been. The 8-year-old in the kitchen. The teenager who'd slept on the floor of Harold's hospital room when he had his back surgery because she refused to go home. The woman in the white dress in Savannah with roses in her hair. The woman sitting across from me now at a table in a room that smelled like fresh paint, trying to find her way back to herself. I'm sorry, she said. I should have paid more attention. I should have asked you directly instead of just listening to, you don't need to do that now, I said. There's time for all of that. Right now I just need to know one thing. She waited. Are you with me? She looked at the proposal on the table. She looked at me. The answer wasn't a legal document. It wasn't any of the papers in the briefcase. It was just her face, and the way her shoulders dropped that last quarter inch, and the way she let out a long, slow breath like someone coming up from underwater. Yes, she said. We sat together for a while after that without talking. I left the briefcase on the table. I didn't need to take it home and study it anymore. I had memorized everything in it, turned it over in my mind on 100 evenings, and now it had served its purpose. The room was quiet. The parking lot outside was quiet. A cloud moved across the afternoon sun and then moved away, and the light came back through the window and lay across the table between us, pale and ordinary and good. I had not come here to win something. I want to be clear about that. Winning was not the word I would use for what I felt sitting in that chair. What I felt was closer to what happens when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time and you finally set it down in the right place. Not relief exactly, not triumph, but a kind of completion, a return to alignment. Harold had asked me not to forget. I hadn't. I had taken the long way around to remembering, but I had gotten there. Later, driving home, I stopped at the cemetery. I don't do this often. Harold was not a man who would have wanted to be visited out of obligation, and I've never believed that grief requires a particular location. But that afternoon, I wanted to go. I parked by the old oak tree, and I walked to the headstone, and I stood there in the early evening light with my hands in my coat pockets. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't need to. I just stood there for a while, and the wind moved through the oak tree, and somewhere across the cemetery a bird started up and then stopped again. I drove home. I made dinner. I called Patricia to tell her how it had gone, and she said, I never doubted you for a single second. And I told her I had doubted myself plenty for both of us, and she laughed and said that was why we made a good team. I set the briefcase by the front door. I would need it again. There would be attorneys and board meetings and the long practical work of setting things right, and none of it would be simple. Kevin was not a simple man, and this was not a simple situation, and I was not naive enough to think that one afternoon in a conference room had resolved everything. But it had resolved the most important thing, the thing Harold had asked me to hold on to. The window could be fixed. The truth was easier than the alternative, even when it didn't feel that way. And the worst mistake you can make is to confuse the person who holds the title with the person who built the thing. I had built the thing. I was still here,